the role of your role as a steward in the Weingarten investigatory meeting. We will spend some time on that. Then, as a special surprise, we are going to watch a short, like about an 8-minute YouTube, which is it's a reenactment of a investigatory meeting, but you'll get a chance to watch what it looks like. And then we'll do a little breakout. Half of you will stay with me, half of you will go with Natalie, and we'll just talk about what you saw and, you know, any other questions you have about these meetings. And then we'll come back, and that's pretty much going to be it for the night. So that's the plan, and everybody is hopefully on board still. Okay, so I am going to turn this over to Miss Natalie.
Thanks, Deborah. Welcome. And like Deborah said, some of this may be repeat, but I think it's always good. And usually you pick up a pearl of wisdom somewhere along the way. I would also encourage, if you have questions, like Deborah said, go ahead and you know, speak up and speak out. If you feel more comfortable doing chat, we'll be checking both. But we're going to start off here, and I'd like to know if somebody would share with us, do you know what Weingartner rights mean? And if so, go ahead and blurt it out, or if you'd like to write it in chat, let us know. When somebody says Weingartner rights, what does that mean?
Yeah, right to have union representation at a meeting that could potentially lead to disciplinary action.
Ringer, there's a ringer in the room.
Yep, very, very good, Carla. Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's the right of the employee to ask for representation anytime they feel it might lead to discipline. And question that I would have here, is that something that the employer has to provide? Or is that something automatically they would provide? Or is it up to the employee to ask for representation? What do you folks think?
You gotta ask.
Yeah, they're not going to give it to you.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Buck, I wanted to follow up. I think you're thinking of special status of a steward rather than initially at Weingarten. And that's yes, there is special status that you have as a steward, but Weingarten are actually legal rights that you have as a union member.
Exactly. And so the true definition is what Deborah has put up there. It's the right of a represented employee, whether they're a member or not. Once again, why is it if they're a member or not? Because as stewards and officers, we're defending the four corners of the contract. So if this is the type of meeting that could lead to discipline, we still want to defend a non-member because we want to defend the contract in totality. And it's really a member asking for a union representative to be at an investigatory interview or some sort of meeting if they feel that the supervisor or manager, the questions they're going to ask may lead to discipline for that individual. So it's really another set of ears and eyes for that person. The employee themselves will still have to answer the questions, but you're there to actually support them and be another set of ears and eyes for them to take notes. And then if need be, you know, to help them along the way, if they're getting agitated or upset or crying, maybe to ask for a break. But you're really there to assist them in this process as management basically checks into something or investigates, you know, a complaint or an issue, something that's work related.
Good.
Next slide. We've touched on this a little bit because, as Deborah said, we've got some good ringers in here. But overall, whose meeting is actually, when an employer has an investigatory meeting, whose meeting is it?
Theirs.
There you go. Carla's right. So you're exactly right. It's really the employer's meeting. And because it's the employer's meeting, what's the responsibility of the employees that are being called in and being questioned? Are they to answer questions? Are they to answer questions truthfully? Are they to look at the steward and expect, the steward or the officer to answer? What do you guys think? And I'm seeing some stuff.
Answer truthfully. That's always a
Yep.
good plan.
Answer truthfully is there. You have to ask. Bottom line, it is the employer's meeting, and the employees are basically, you need to instruct them that they need to answer the questions honestly and truthfully. But what I'd also caution too is listen to the question that's asked. And Carla's right, short but sweet is the best. So when they ask you your question, the employee is probably going to be nervous. That's understandable. It's okay to, ask them to reiterate or say, are you asking me this? But this is a time that, like Carla said, if you can be short and sweet, answer the question, but don't have, basically verbal diarrhea and tell them more than they need to know. It's really keep the answers concise, honest, and short. That's the best way to deal with this, because you don't want to hand them ammunition, that may not be needed. And that's basically the best guidance that you can give the employees is answer, but be short and sweet. Next question here. Whose responsibility is it to ask for union representation? We've talked about that. The employee must ask. Many employers, believe it or not, especially if they know it's an investigatory meeting, they may already arrange it or offer it up. I know a lot of the locals that I support, the majority of them, when the employer knows that they're going to be doing some sort of investigatory meeting, and whether they're sure it may or may not lead to discipline, a lot of times they actually coordinate with the union even before they notify the employee. But they don't necessarily have to do that. So, don't be surprised if they actually contact you and set that up. That could be a possibility. There are some that don't, and then we'll just wait to see if the employee asks for it themselves. Next, if a member asks for a rep, what are management's options? So what do you guys think?
Before or after the meeting?
It says get one, reschedule, or cancel.
Good.
Very good, Buck. You exactly have it. So it is the employee's right to ask for representation. You're correct. Basically, management can stop the meeting right there and say, hey, let's go get your union rep. If it's feasible to do that, the meeting would just be temporarily postponed. They could cancel the meeting and reschedule it when the rep could be there. Another option they could give is basically ask the employee, they have the option, do they want to continue without a rep or not? So unfortunately, there are sometimes employees that will do that. There are some that, if not sure, I would probably counsel them to say, no, I'd like my union representation or my union representative here and get that representation, just because it's nice to, like I said before, have another set of ears and eyes in that meeting. And then next question, who gets to pick which steward attends? What do you guys think? Does management get to pick who attends on behalf of the union?
I'd say the union or the steward.
Very good. It's basically a combination. The union gets to pick, and actually the member themselves maybe has a preference. So sometimes that's why we have multiple stewards sometimes in certain departments, because it may give an option. Maybe I get along better with Bob than I do with Susie, so I as the employee may say, I'd like my representative Bob there to represent me. Sometimes I just reach out to the union and say, I want somebody there, and then the union will supply somebody.
So the management has to wait until that particular steward has availability?
That's actually a good question. And really what
there
we
it is.
get in, yeah. And I was gonna say, we're gonna get into that. It's really what they call the reasonable standard. So if, let's say, using the example that I gave, the employer would prefer that it be Bob and not Susie, but Bob won the trip of a lifetime and he's going to be gone for 2 months. Do you think the employer is going to say, well, that's all right, we'll wait 2 months when Bob's available? No, they're not, because that's not a reasonable standard. But if it was a matter of, yeah, we'd like to have the meeting today, but Bob, let's say, isn't working today, but it'll be in tomorrow, that's reasonable to say, yes, we could reschedule for tomorrow. So really, it comes down to, like I said, it's what that reasonable standard is, but they can't necessarily, you know, force and say, well, we're having the meeting today, come heck or high water. You know, doesn't matter if Bob's available tomorrow. It's reasonable to put it off, you know, 24 hours and set up that meeting. So if they aren't available, once again, just ask for it to be rescheduled, but it needs to make sense. Next question, can you bring in
Question.
some?
Can
Go ahead.
you change your
Sure.
mind if you're like, oh, just send whoever the person that shows up, you hate them, or they're like visibly sweating and obviously haven't done this before? Like, what if you get in the meeting and you're like, I thought this was going to be cool, but actually can it be please anyone but?
That's actually a pretty good question. And I think the question here would be, who sent them? So did the union send them, or did you specifically ask for this person and then change your mind? So can you shed a little bit more light on the scenario you're painting?
Both. If Ian sends a rando and I didn't realize that this person was an option and I don't like it, I say, no, just kidding, I actually want someone else.
So what I would suggest with that, if that scenario happened and you reached out to the union and said, send me somebody, and they sent you somebody, the union individual should be meeting with the employee before you go into the investigatory meeting. If you don't feel comfortable, if you're not seeing eye to eye, I think it's okay to have that conversation. Say, you know, thank you, I appreciate, you know, that you sent Susie or whatever. I'm not comfortable. I'd like to see if I could get a different steward. Can we reschedule, you know, for tomorrow with somebody else? And then go into management and explain to management that the steward or officer that you would like to bring is not available, but they'd be available tomorrow.
Okay.
So
But
the reality here, you're not going to be able to postpone it forever, but you know, it might be reasonable just because Susie's available right now this second. If you're not comfortable, you know, you can have that conversation with Susie about, you know, thank you, but you know, could I get somebody else? But yet it has to be reasonable if you're going to replace them.
I think I also would suggest, like Natalie said, typically the steward and the employee meet ahead of time. And we all know that there's often there can be conflicts between two individuals. And as a steward, if someone's uncomfortable with me being their representative in the meeting, I just assume they told me, because it's not, you know, it's personal, and yet it's not personal. I'm doing an advocacy job. And if I'm not going to be the person that they're comfortable doing it, then I want to know that, because I don't want to put them or me in any kind of awkward situation. I haven't had that happen, but I think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and sometimes, honestly, you know, using the example, and that's what I was kind of saying is, you know, why are you not comfortable? If they come, you know, flying over, maybe they just got the phone call and, hey, I had to run across campus, you know, to get here, and you know, I'm overweight and chubby and, you know, out of shape, and you know, I rushed over here to represent you, and so it seems like I'm huffing and puffing, I'm sweating, and you know, I'm uneasy. You know, maybe just us having that conversation, maybe you're going to realize, oh, well, that's why you seem kind of rushed and, you know, whatever. The two individuals having that conversation may be able to work it out, where it's like, oh, well, my first blush, you know, feeling was not, I was not comfortable, but now that we've talked about it, I am comfortable. We could go into the meeting together. But once again, like Deborah said, if you're not, or you think there's an inherent personality conflict, it's okay, you know, to say, you know, could I have somebody else? I'm not comfortable here. Next, can an employee bring in somebody who isn't a steward or an officer to the meeting? What do you folks think?
I see no shaking heads, no.
No.
Okay, so the reality here, they could. They can't bring like a family member or like an attorney like to this meeting. And a lot of people will call this sometimes a person of comfort. A lot of times it's better to have somebody else in there with you because they can take notes. They can be your ears and eyes because the employee is obviously, going to be frightened and upset and maybe not processing like they normally would. But the reality is you're kind of taking a risk doing that because this person of comfort you may be bringing in isn't necessarily trained and may not know exactly what the process is or really what the questions are to ask, that type of thing. So can you? Yes, you can. Is it always advisable? No, it's actually better if you can have a trained steward or an officer or a staff rep there, just because they know kind of what direction to move things, what questions to ask. They're more experienced and have probably experienced this versus bringing in, a buddy or a friend, even though they can be another set of ears and eyes. They may not really do you any good because they wouldn't really know what to ask.
Go ahead, Carla.
But this is a person who would be in lieu of the steward. This is not in addition to the steward.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So they can't bring an extra person in along with the steward.
Correct.
It's one or the other.
And it would have to be somebody that's in the bargaining unit. They couldn't, just bring in
good to
their
know
buddy
too.
who works at the coffee shop next door, right? Somebody
Right,
that's
okay.
actually in the bargaining unit.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you need another one.
Can you bring someone or can you bring a union rep in at any time in the meeting? Does it have to be at the very beginning?
That's actually a good question. And the vast majority of folks, because they know management has said, hey, we're going to call you in for an investigation, Candace, most of the time they want them there from the get-go. But once in a while, you might have somebody that says, hey, I'm fine with it. I can start without, but at any point in time, if you feel uncomfortable, you could say, hey, time out. I really would like to contact my union and get a representative, in here with me. And theoretically, they should stop the meeting and then either you guys go out and find somebody or reschedule it when your union rep could be there. But I would say the vast majority of time in my experience is the rep is already there before the meeting starts. One, because then they can kind of walk you through the process, what to expect, to give you an idea of really why you're meeting, because the employers don't always tell you that from the get-go.
And I think, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to add was that sometimes what happens is the employer will say, oh, I just want to talk to you about, just a little issue that's, about scheduling. And then you get in the meeting and it takes a real hard right turn and you're suddenly thinking, uh-oh, sounds like they're asking me questions about my performance or my behavior, and it potentially could lead to discipline. So you absolutely at any time can say time out. I need my steward. Because remember what it said, a reasonable belief. That does not mean it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. That means a reasonable belief. If you believe that something in this meeting potentially could lead to discipline, you absolutely can have a steward at any point.
That's the scenario I was kind of thinking, like, it's like, hey, come on in. I just want to have a quick chat with you. And then it turns into this, blah, 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 just like
yes,
ambush.
yes.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And your question is good, Candace. The next question, does a witness called into an interview get a union rep? What do you guys think?
If they want one.
If they want one, I see some no. Let's see if they want one.
Very good, Dusty. And the answer there is generally not, because once again, you're technically a witness. But you're right. If they ask for union representation, then the employer should allow it. And once again, I think if you're a witness and they say you're a witness to this issue, they can ask too and say, am I just a witness or am I accused, or, could this lead to discipline? So once again, it's having that conversation beforehand. And if they're not comfortable, or the answer has been, well, we are investigating something and you as a witness, Natalie, it could lead to discipline, then, realistically, they should ask for union representation. And last but not least, when do Weingartner rights not apply? Do you think that there are any times that this wouldn't apply? Any examples anybody can give? Okay, what happens, a lot of departments have weekly or monthly, like general department meetings. Is that something that, every single time can say, I want my union rep here because of a department? Okay, the answer there is generally speaking, no. There are certain type of things. Weingartner is really, if it's something that really could lead to discipline, it's that negative action that can be taken by the employer. That's why you want the union representation. But generally speaking, like general management meetings, generally speaking, performance reviews, or some sort of meeting that isn't investigatory or fact finding, those aren't something that you would definitely jump to every single time and ask for a union rep to be there and be present. Now, once again, if it's going south or you're not comfortable, sometimes it is nice to say, time out, could I go get a union person? Because they would maybe help with the communication or help in the process, but it's not something that would automatically happen.
Actually, if someone has broken a law, there is another standard called garrity that means that the employer cannot use information you provide them in an investigatory meeting and hand it over to the police. The police have to do their own investigation because, when the police do an investigation, you have a right to an attorney. So those two different types of investigations can't be mixed together. So you would still potentially have to answer questions of your employer that has to do with them asking, about your employment issues, but they couldn't then say, okay, now we're going to hand them over to the, sheriff's department and they will use it to arrest you. So that's a whole nother class. Garrity is kind of a mess. Anybody here in public safety? That comes up a lot more in public safety. Yeah, Natalie does.
Yeah, I would agree. And Candace, your question is good. If they say, yes, it could lead to discipline because of your performance, or some places put people on what they call a work improvement plan because they say your conduct or performance is below standard, et cetera. A lot of times with those work improvement plans, if you don't improve, it can lead to discipline. So, the minute, like if they hedge or say, yes, this could lead to, I would suggest and say, stop, can we get a union person in there and then continue? And you'd want to give the union person a heads up that you felt like, hey, they're going to be disciplining me because of my performance. So it's more than just the performance evaluation. And sometimes they're kind of quick. They'll try to tag team it. I've had that experience too, where they start off with the performance evaluation and maybe it doesn't go real well. And at the end, they turn around and then try to do like a discipline. Well, here's a letter of counseling or a written reprimand, or here's a work improvement. Those are all things that really are ding against the employee. So right there, the employee should say, time out. I want union representation, and then we'll continue this conversation, because the employer's kind of gone past what the real focus of the meeting was. And that was actually sit down and go through your performance and give you those ratings.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Are there any other questions about Weingarten? And because we're going to switch now to talking about your duties and roles and responsibilities during an investigatory meeting. And I don't know, some of you may have noticed I dropped a Weingarten handout in the chat, and I will, after this little section, I will drop all of this information in another handout in the chat. So you don't have to take notes unless you're a compulsive note taker like me. You will get this. So we said Weingarten rights define the steward's role during the meeting. And so we're going to divide this meeting into three parts: what the steward does before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. So let's remember that this is management's meeting. They have a right to ask the questions, and the employee must answer the questions. There's no Fifth Amendment protection for employees. They have to actually answer the questions and truthfully. So let's look at some things. The first thing that typically you would do as a steward, if you don't already have this information, is you'd find out, what's this meeting about? What's the topic of the investigation, right? The employer doesn't have to give you all the nitty gritty. They don't have to hand you all the documents they've looked at. They can just say, this is about performance. This is about attendance. This is about, whatever, coming to work late. Sometimes they'll tell that to the employee, and sometimes, and this happens more often than I like to hear about, they will say to the employee, oh, you'll find out once you're in the meeting. But actually, part of the Weingarten rights is that the employee and the steward, in your case, has the right to know the topic of the meeting before the meeting begins. So if the employee doesn't know, you're perfectly welcome to go and ask the supervisor yourself and say, what is the topic of this meeting? What's going on here? So then you as a steward will meet with this employee before the meeting to get their side of the story. Hey, this is about inappropriate computer use. What can you tell me about that? So sometimes they'll say, I have no idea what this is, what's going on here. Or sometimes you'll get a whole bunch of information about what they think the problem is. But this gives you a chance to sort of frame this meeting that you're going into as the representative, the advocate. And this touches back on what I had mentioned about garrity rights. If, for example, the topic of the meeting is potentially a criminal charge, theft, abuse, assault, you are not expected to handle those. You call Natalie, you call your staff rep, you have them step up and help you with those. Those are pretty, can be very complicated. So make sure that you get some additional help unless you happen to be an expert. And we'll cover those rights in a later training. If you have questions about it specifically, you can also stay on after the training, after this class, and we can have a little conversation about it. The next thing you want to do is prepare the member for the meeting. So what kinds of things, and we've alluded to these several times now, what kinds of things do you think you should tell this employee that you are going into the meeting with? What kinds of things would you want to tell them? Keep it short. Yep, very good. Don't elaborate. Be truthful, honest. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So yes, this is a case that I think every rep has had to face when the employee does not tell the truth and then ends up getting disciplined further or even terminated for their lack of honesty. So that's one that we try to beat over their head and only answer the question that's asked. Yep, they don't have to go into the history. They don't have to speculate. Just stay on topic, stay on subject. So let's see how we did. Tell the truth. Amen. Answer the questions. Don't elaborate. Now, I often will say, look, if you start going on too long, I'm going to kick your ankle, or I'm going to cough. If you're on Zoom, it's a little harder to kick ankles, but I'm going to cough. I'm going to, to get your attention to say, stop. But you also can ask for a break. If they are talking too much and you feel like this is kind of out of control, you can say, time out, we need to take a break. And then you take the individual away from the meeting and say, hey, you are oversharing. You just need to think about the question and answer it concisely. And the other thing that's really important is for you to explain what your role is, because in this meeting, they may be expecting this is you. You're going to come in and you're going to pound the table and you're going to yell at management and you're going to fix everything. And that's not your role. This is not your meeting to do that. You will have that opportunity later. But in this meeting, it's your job to be there for the employee and to support them, take notes, and you'll see that on the next slide too, to do the things that help this meeting go as smoothly and efficiently as possible. These are very difficult meetings for people. They're sure they're going to get terminated, even if it's just a little tiny issue. So if they're emotional, they're hard meetings for people to go through. So you want to tell them what your role is. So let's look at that. So here we are, meeting has started. So here's the things that I think we've touched on some of these. You take notes. If you do nothing else in this meeting, if you take notes, that would be wonderful. We want you to be able to do more if you're ready for it. But that's very important. This might be the beginning of a grievance or an arbitration, which is the last step in the grievance, most contracts grievance process. And so your notes can be really critical. You ask clarifying questions. If management sometimes comes into these meetings and they have a whole idea in their head about what the answers are going to be. And so they blast out a whole bunch of questions and you can say, whoa, slow down. What exactly are you asking here? Right? So you can slow them down so that you give your person that you're representing the best opportunities possible to answer. Again, sometimes we have to redirect management, keep them on track. I've had meetings where the management is sure they know what the answer is, and they just keep asking the same question over and over because they want to hear the answer. They think it's supposed to happen. And you can say, hey, you've already asked that question. We need to ask, is there another question? This is not the time to argue the case. So this is a chance for this is management's meeting to gather information, because this is really key. No discipline has occurred. This is their chance to decide whether they're going to discipline somebody. So we're not going to argue the case because we don't know if there is a case. If they decide, oh, wait, there's nothing here, we're not going to do anything, we've spent a whole bunch of time arguing. This is not part of the Weingarten meetings, the investigatory meetings. And you can't answer questions for the members. Sometimes people want you to talk for them. Can't do it. The employee must answer the questions themselves. But again, it's important for you to know that you have a right to call for a break when necessary. And there might be several times you call for a break. You might call for a break because the employee that you're representing is really upset and you need to give them a chance to gather themselves together. You may have to call it because management's upset and going off and getting out of control. And you can just say, oh no, we don't need to sit in here. You don't have to say that part out loud, but time out, we're going to take a break, with the idea being they can start getting their crap together. And another thing that sometimes happens is you come into the meeting thinking you understand what the story is because you've spent that pre-meeting talking to the employee, and then something comes out that's completely different than what you understood. You can take a break, you can ask for a caucus, so you can go talk to the employee about this new issue that you just found out about. Does anybody have any other examples of reasons you might want to take a break, a caucus during an investigatory meeting?
What if you saw
Deborah,
someone just say a lie and you're like, hey, let's talk about this, and then you can be honest?
You say that to who, Beth?
Like if you're there with an employee, they explain what happened, and then they answer a question that you know the answer to because they just told you before, like, yeah, they did do that thing. You see them lie, and you're like, let's take a little break and talk about it.
That's exactly right. Sorry, we need to take a break because you know that they're putting themselves at higher risk by lying about it. So that's a little tricky because then they have to agree to come back to the meeting and say, you know what, I misspoke. What I meant to say was, go ahead, Natalie. Oh, Dusty, did you want to add something? It looks like.
Yeah, and Candace, it was Buck. But I think it goes both ways. Also, sometimes because they're nervous, they may have shared something with you before the meeting that they're not getting across during the meeting. So, like you said, if they lie, you want to correct them before they dig a bigger hole for themselves. But also, since you can't really answer for them, sometimes it's nice to remind them, hey, you want to bring up X, Y, and Z that you shared with us. It's important for them, to know that because they may be nervous and not thinking about the things that they really should be.
Yeah, I call that, I sort of land on ask clarifying questions. So as a steward, you can say, it's perfectly appropriate to say, Candace, do you want to talk a little bit more about why you were late on Wednesday, right? To trigger that part of the conversation. Was there somebody else that wanted to jump in here? Okay. And the last thing on this during the meeting is I always encourage everyone to ask management, how long, when will you let us know the results of this meeting? Because if you've been in an investigatory meeting or you've been under investigation yourself, you know, every day that goes by without knowing what's going to happen just feels terrible. And it's a lot of stress for people. So our job is to say, can you let us know, you know, will you let us know, what day will you let us know? Friday? Okay, fine. I'll follow up with you on Friday to see, you know, where you're at. So that's really important. That's peace of mind kind of thing for the employee. Any other thoughts or questions about what you do during the meeting? Okay.
Do you have to be concerned about something an employee is saying, like throwing another member under the bus, kind of? Or is it just whatever happens, you're going to speak your truth and I can't do anything?
Ideally, you've had enough of a conversation ahead of time that you can say to them, look, they're going to ask questions about you. If you feel that there's other information that they need about other employees, this isn't the meeting to provide it, and hopefully talk to them, talk that through with them. What people's inclination often is to say, well, it's not fair because I maybe did that, but Chloe's does it like every other day. And she's not still, sorry, Chloe, I picked on you because you're right on my screen. And she's, you know, they're not getting in trouble, right? And people have the inclination to try to protect themselves by, you know, refocusing the attention over here. So we do want to avoid that. That's management's job. It's not our job to volunteer what other people are doing or not doing. Unfortunately. That was good. That's good, Beck. Thanks.
In that case, Deborah, I'm trying to remember from our last session where if you would potentially after the meeting, well, I know we're getting it after the meeting, but that would maybe lead to a grievance in that you're saying, okay, I'm being disciplined for this, but Chloe's not. So what's up with that?
Yes, that's good. That's exactly right. So let's say they disciplined you, Candace, for tardies, and you know that Chloe has been tardy like 17 times more. We as a union, we would grieve your potential discipline. Remember, no discipline's occurred yet, but this is after they discipline you. We'd grieve your discipline, and in the process, we'd ask for the records of anybody else that has been, you know, disciplined or has been spoken to about being tardy, for example. So we can do that research and we can point out their inconsistencies as a union person. We just don't want the individual in the investigatory meeting to be the policeman of the rest of the workforce. Does that help, Candace? Does that make sense?
Yep. Nope. That makes sense.
Okay, cool.
Is that not going to automatically lead to the other person getting in trouble for having missed stuff? Or is it like, too bad, so sad, you should have done this?
It gets really complicated really fast, Buck. You're so right. There was a really big case in, I'm in Oregon. I mean, I've worked all over the Northwest doing union work, but in Oregon, I was familiar, and this is an IT case where they were disciplining somebody for inappropriate use, you know, like too much time on their computer doing non-work stuff. I think I think that's what it was. And that person said, well, you should check everybody else's records because they're all doing the same thing I am. They're all on eBay and, you know, Etsy and whatever. And that's exactly what the employer did. And it created a huge issue for everybody. So yeah, it gets really sticky when it's something like that ends up getting a whole bunch of other people in trouble. Like I said, I don't want to do management's job for them. They should be paying attention generally to the whole workforce and not just focusing on one person. Did you have any words of wisdom to add to that, Natalie?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And sometimes too, it is their investigatory meeting, but sometimes they're and they're hoping, and that's why we're saying keep your answers short and concise. They're hoping that you will throw somebody under the bus or give them more ammunition. So, realistically, you really don't want to do that. You want to bring it back to you and answer the questions in relation to you. You can have a separate conversation with your representative and kind of say, hey, I'm worried about so-and-so or whatever, but that really isn't the place to try to throw them under the bus or give them ammunition that could be used against your fellow union brothers and sisters.
Yep. Don't worry about dogs. They're fine. They have things to say too. Okay, so I just want to throw in chat or unmute or talk or whatever. Meeting's over. What do you do now? You're the steward. The meeting's over. What do you do? No thoughts on that?
Debrief. Talk about
Debrief.
how it went.
That's right. Exactly. The employee will have a lot of feelings potentially at this point, right? So you may have to do a little bit of a rerun of the meeting. So yes, exactly. Spend some time with them. They may still be pretty emotional, talk them down a little bit, give them some support. Excellent. Other things. Schedule a meeting. That's good, Carla.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then meet with them is another comment that was put in chat.
Yep. You got that one. That's for sure. Sometimes you may get additional information after the meeting is over that is appropriate to share with management. Let's say the person said, no, I didn't do that. And the management says, well, can anybody verify that? And they say, I don't think so. But you find out later that yes, in fact, somebody was in the room and they did see this happen, and it upholds and confirms the employee's story. So you can go back to management and say, hey, you might want to talk to, Candace, because they have information that also supports, Carla's concern. File your notes so they can find it. Yes, definitely keep track of those notes. That's really important as well. And also, follow up with management. Remember, we ended our meeting with management by saying, hey, when will we hear back from you? Keep that on your calendar. Go back to them. Say, hey, guess what? It's been 5 days. You said you'd have some information. This is a difficult, we need to know what your plan is for this. I have seen awful investigations where they didn't give the employee the final decision for months. And it is agonizing for those folks. It's practically torture. I think it's completely unreasonable. So that's really difficult. Any other thoughts? Yeah, good. Okay, so I want to show you a video. This will be a test of my technical skills. Let's see how we do here. This is a video that's put together by a different union, OPEIU, but I really like it. And generally what we do is Natalie and me and another rep would play the parts of the steward, the employee, and the supervisor, but we'll just go ahead and show you this video, which does the same thing. And while you're watching this video, keep sort of thoughts in your head about anything you might do differently, things that come up that surprised you or you have questions about. And we'll do a debrief after the video just to see what their observations were about this. So now we're going to try this.
The video you're about to watch was written, produced, and performed by OPIU local aid shop stewards to help you represent a coworker in a meeting with a supervisor that could lead to discipline. These types of meetings are called wine garden meetings.
Hey, Lori. Thanks for helping me out. My manager told me yesterday that she wanted to meet with me. I don't know what it's about, but I just hope I'm not getting in trouble.
I'm glad you called. She's not required to tell you that you have a right.
Oh, sorry, guys. I was trying to move things around.
Unless you ask for it. Did your manager tell you what the meeting is about at all?
I asked her yesterday and she said that she just wanted to ask me some questions. So at that point, of course, I said I wanted to have a steward in the meeting.
Okay. Do you have any idea of something that occurred lately that may have triggered this?
I called in sick again on Friday. I had back surgery, pretty serious back surgery about 3 months ago.
How much time have you missed?
More than usual, a couple of days here and there.
Have you missed work for any other reason?
No, I mean, I've never had any attendance issues until now.
When you called in, did you tell your manager it was for because you're back, or did you call in just saying you were sick?
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, Barb knows why I've been out. I mean, she knew that I had the surgery and she knows that I'm going to physical therapy.
Has she ever talked to you about applying for FMLA or family medical leave?
No,
Has she had somebody look at your workstation area like you requested?
no,
Have you ever been in an investigating meeting like this before?
no. And I kind of can't believe this is happening.
So it can be scary. She's probably going to have somebody from HR in with us as well. But as long as they're just asking investigating questions, you have a right to have representation, so I can be there to help you and assist you. When you answer the questions, you give her honest answers. Don't guess. Don't say I might have. You just want to have short, precise answers. That's it. If you're not sure, feel comfortable and just say you don't remember. That's acceptable. All right. And if you need to stop and talk to me, get a step away from us so we can talk privately, just let me know or tap my arm and we'll go outside.
Okay.
All right.
Because Stephanie has been called to a meeting where the supervisor is asking questions that could lead to her discipline, she can have her shop steward present. She's exercising her Weingarten rights, named after a Supreme Court decision that gives union represented employees the right to have a shop steward or union representative present in this type of meeting. Your employer usually has no obligation to tell members of these rights. Employees must ask for union representation just like Stephanie did. Members must be given time to contact a union representative or shop steward. The Weingarten rule is applied when a supervisor is questioning an employee to get information that the employee reasonably believes could be used as grounds for discipline. If the meeting is just to inform about a discipline without investigating, this rule doesn't apply. If the supervisor refuses to stop the meeting to allow representation, it's best to comply now and grieve later. Try to find out the general reason for the meeting. If the member doesn't know, ask the supervisor to tell you.
Thank you both for coming. Stephanie, I've noticed you've had a lot of absences in the last 3 months. I just want to check and see what was going on.
You and I have talked about this. You know that I went and had back surgery and it was supposed to fix things, but I've still had some problems. I've been experiencing some pain sometimes and I've been going to physical therapy. Sometimes the pain's so intense I can't get out of bed.
Well, my report here shows you've actually called in 7 times or more in the last 3 months. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess.
Can we have a copy of that paperwork that you're reading there?
I don't have any extra copies on hand. Stephanie, are you aware of our policy regarding absences?
I'm sure I read it a long time ago. I haven't really looked at it since then because I haven't had any issues.
Well, you were given that policy when you were first hired. We also reviewed this policy over a year ago, and it states that you're not allowed to have more than 4 occurrences in a 12-month period, which you've obviously exceeded. If you also call in on a Monday or a Friday, that counts as 2 occurrences.
Do you have a copy of that policy and the documentation that shows that Stephanie received it?
No, but I can get that for you.
Does it count as an occurrence even though she's under the care of a doctor?
That is correct.
My understanding is that Stephanie's absences wouldn't count as occurrences if she was covered under the FMLA.
She has no record of FMLA on her file. She is not on extended leave. She's just been absent way too much.
So I spoke to her in the hallway and she wasn't aware that it was something that she could possibly qualify for. Can we get a copy of your FMLA policy and forms as well?
Listen, Lori, I appreciate you wanting to help Stephanie out, but I'm really going to need her to answer my questions and for you to do less questioning of me.
Well, I understand that, and Stephanie's more than willing to answer your questions, but it's my job here to represent her and to help assist with the outcome of this meeting. So we do have a right to ask for that information. We'll need to get a copy of the policies as well as the attendance form you're reading.
She's going to need to talk to HR about that.
By looking through this in my notes, it seems that there's several issues that need to be investigated further here.
What further issues?
Stephanie appears that she does qualify for FMLA, and she did ask that her workstation be looked at and possibly modified. Can you tell me the status of her work area request?
I'll have to look into that. I know it's been a while, but at this time, as I stated, she has no FMLA on file, and I have no choice but to give her a written warning. I have to follow policy and procedure.
All right. Could we get a minute to talk to each other?
That's fine. I'll take a call.
I'm so mad. This is not my fault. It's not like I want to be injured. It's just miserable.
I know. Take a deep breath. You don't want to lose your temper. We know we're right.
I'm pretty sure she's going to present you with a written warning document. I know, signing it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just acknowledges you received it. And we can turn around and file a grievance against it.
You guys ready? So Stephanie, I'm gonna have to give you a written warning. I'm gonna need you to sign this.
We don't agree with this discipline, and after our own investigation, we'll be likely filing a grievance. If I recall the timeline in the contract, it states we have 10 days to submit a grievance. That would be October 25th. Do you agree with that?
That seems about right, yes.
Before we go, could you please make 2 copies of the write-up, a copy of the attendance documentation, the report you showed us today, a copy of the signed acknowledgement showing the last time Stephanie reviewed it. And I need a copy of your FMLA and application forms as well.
I could go and make you those copies, but for the other 2, I'm gonna need you to get back to me tomorrow, or you can go to HR, whichever works best for you.
I'll stop by your office tomorrow and pick those up in the afternoon. Do you mind if Stephanie and I use the room where you can make those copies?
No, that's fine. You may have the room.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Stephanie, here's a copy of the contract for you to review. You can also review a copy of it on the union website. The website also has some good information about the Family Medical Leave Act and other laws and rights that may protect you as well. So it would be good to review. Do you have any questions?
I'm going to stop it there. You guys can see the end of the story if you watch it yourself. Okay, so let me share that, go back to our slides. So let's just get some, I'd like to get some just sort of feedback about what you saw, what you think about this particular steward. I have some feelings about this steward and what they're doing, but I'm curious what you guys are seeing.
I like Buck's comment. She put their attendance policy sucks.
Yes. Yeah. Can you imagine?
I like that she got agreement on the date. She's like, hey, it says they're supposed to do 10 days. That is that date. You agree, correct?
Right. She was checking on the timeline in the contract that says how long you have before you file the grievance. One of the things, did anybody notice anything about the supervisor already having that discipline ready to go? Anybody have any thoughts about that? So remember, the investigatory meeting is supposed to be the meeting where the employer is trying to decide if they're going to do discipline. If the employer's already made that discipline and has that letter all ready to go, I would say this is not an investigatory meeting. This is sort of a sham, frankly. And I've had cases where the supervisor did exactly what this person did and basically slid the discipline out from under their notes and said, well, you've told me enough, here's the discipline. And I grieved it because the idea of just cause, which is another class, is though that the employee has a chance to answer all the questions fully before the discipline is applied. Now, sometimes it's really obvious and they'll just give discipline because, you know, they saw you do X, Y, or Z, get in a fight in the lunchroom. And so, you know, it was sort of a done deal. They didn't have to do a big investigation. Other thoughts on what you saw in this particular video?
I liked how the steward pushed back on against the HR person or the supervisor.
Yep.
In order to obtain those documents, because it didn't seem like originally she wasn't going to give the documentation. Yeah. And then she had to say, we have a right to have this documentation. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that that would have been a step I would take after I decide, after they said whether they're going to discipline. And in this case, they said, we're going to discipline you. So then she reiterated your need for those documents, because that's part of the investigation documenting process of figuring out where our grievance is. Most of the time, I'd say employers do not have the discipline all ready to go. And you can say, if they said, you signed this policy, you would make a note in your notes and say, make sure we get a copy of that policy with, Stephanie's signature on it. So you might do that as follow-up. But in this case, they're kind of squishing everything together so they can give you the picture of all the things the steward can do. Go ahead, Buck.
Would you not have asked for that originally because you just don't want to antagonize them, or it's just if they don't go to discipline, it's not going to be necessary?
That's the second is right. Second is right. If they decide not to discipline, in this case, obviously she was going to, but if they decide not to discipline, it's a moot point. I was spending a lot of time sort of being antagonistic with maybe no need. I used to do, so years ago, but when I was a steward, I would sometimes get similar to this person. I would get in management's face and I would start arguing the case, even before they'd set, even though they set after they, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I would argue the case because I was trying to sort of show my knowledge, my dominance. But what I found was it actually negatively impacted the person I was representing. It made them uncomfortable. So I learned over time to let management have their meetings. I would certainly stop them if they were badgering the person, or I would stop them if I felt they were not treating the person respectfully. I would do all that, but I would try to get through the meeting as quickly as possible without doing, all the arguing and other pieces that made it less comfortable for the employee.
A question, Deborah, that was put in chat, I think Buck put it in there, was
can you record?
Question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you record?
So Council 2 does not recommend recording in these cases. Too many times the recordings have come back to be more problematic than helpful. If you are a new steward, I want to tell you that you have the opportunity to go and shadow other people. And if you do that, then hopefully they'll say, would you please take notes while I am helping with them, doing the representation part. So you'll get practice taking notes as well. But generally, no, we count on our notes. We don't bring in recordings. And I think Washington, I know Oregon, both parties have to know that there's something being taped. You can't sneak a recorder in. Is that true in Washington too, Natalie? Or can one person, is it a one rule?
For these kind of meetings, except for the Garrity or law enforcement, it's a two-party consent state. So theoretically, and actually what happens more is kind of inexperienced supervisors and managers may want to record it. And so they technically, need to ask us, and we always say no.
Any other thoughts on that meeting? Those of you who have a lot of experience, any wisdom you'd like to share with folks who have less experience?
I really, not from experience, but I really like the part where she's like, we're going to sign it. And that's just saying that you acknowledge it. That doesn't mean that it's a thing.
That's right. And that's true. You often have to tell people because they don't want to sign something if they don't agree with it. And sometimes they don't. And that's fine too. I've had people and I would just write, decline to sign, or the supervisor would do that. It doesn't mean they didn't get the discipline. And that's what she was saying, right? Is signing it doesn't mean you agree. You still have the discipline on your file. We'll take the next steps, through the grievance process to get this cleared up.
Yeah, I felt that the steward, she was very aggressive. And not that I didn't like it. I did like it. But I felt like if that were me in that position, I probably wouldn't have been as aggressive. I probably would have been doing more listening and taking notes. And then in the debrief, have all that information, to the employee saying, okay, this is what I'm going to ask for. This is what we're going to do. Things like that. But like I said, not that I didn't like that she was being very aggressive. I just don't think that I would have approached it that way.
No, and there's not one single way to do this. And I agree with you, Candace. I think she was more aggressive than I would have been, and I've been doing this for a long time. And I don't find that that's, like I said a few minutes ago, I don't find that's effective, both for the employee I'm representing or frankly for the supervisor. I would rather get through the meeting as quickly and efficiently as possible and then, get out all my guns and all my, evidence and all my investigation and do that once they've decided on the discipline. That's what's worked better for me. But others, Dusty he knows his employer, he knows the system internally for him. And so therefore, what works for that group could be quite different. Okay, you guys, I've held you over, so I'm always a little sensitive about that. And I so appreciate you sticking with us. And please feel free to stay on if you want to have additional questions. If we haven't made this clear enough, your staff rep is a great resource and can help you with all of these things. They come and teach these classes with me, so they know this stuff inside and out.